Aaron Rodgers is finally a New York Jet. We're talking all that and more on today's episode of Locked On Dynasty.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Matt Williamson and Ryan McDowell.
Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. Welcome to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan McDowell. You can follow me on Twitter at RyanMC23. Joining me, as always, is Matt Williamson. Find Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Matt, welcome to draft week. We are finally here. We're kicking it off with a bang. How's it going?
Going great, man. It's going to be a busy week, but maybe with the best week of the year. I am psyched. Happy draft week to all.
Oh, it's going to be great. Mentioned it at the top of the show. We have, I feel like we've joked about this Rodgers deal for weeks that over a month ago, you and I delayed our recording to try to wait for the official Rodgers news. We waited. That never came. And now here we are just a couple days before the NFL draft. And, there was talk recently of a deadline. Not sure if that was a Jets deadline or a Packers deadline, or if honestly, if that was even accurate, but it felt like something would get done before the NFL draft kicked off. And here it is. Aaron Rodgers is a New York Jet. Here's the deal. The Jets get Rodgers. They also get the Packers number 15. They get a 5th rounder in this year's draft. The Packers get 13. So basically spots, Packers move up 2 spots essentially. They also get the 42nd overall pick this year. That's an early 2nd rounder, of course. They get a 6th rounder this year. So they go from a 6, they go from a 5 down to a 6. You can think about it that way. And what's really important, I think, is they get a 2024 2nd rounder. The stipulation is that pick goes to a 1st rounder if Rodgers plays 65% of the snaps this year. And certainly that would be the expectation of the Jets and of everyone involved, that pick eventually becomes a 1st rounder. So they get a 1st, they get a 2nd, couple pick swaps in there. Matt, what's your first thought on this trade?
Yeah, and this just happened. So I haven't been talking about it all day or anything like that. This is new news. I saw it on the way coming home just a minute ago. And when you lay it out, Brian Peacock and I have been talking about this seems like for months. What's the compensation going to be? Yeah. And we kind of settled on, thought it would be those 2 seconds, after the Elijah Moore trade. I thought they'd end up getting both those seconds or a conditional pick in the future. But I didn't think the conditional pick could possibly be a 1st. And I'm also a little shocked that the condition is how much Rodgers plays this year, not is he on next year's roster. He could retire after the year, after a great season, and the Jets are on the hook if he plays 65% of the snaps.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. You had talked about it on here as well, that you thought any kind of conditional pick would be related to Rodgers' status beyond 2023, but that's not how it works out. I think this is a pretty nice win for the Green Bay Packers. They get a slight move up. Maybe that ends up mattering, maybe not. But that pick, which could become a 1st rounder in next year's draft, is huge, along with the 2nd rounder this year. Nice deal for the Packers. And obviously the Jets had to make this move. I don't think we have to go too deep into this. We've all been playing under the assumption that Rodgers would be a Jet. So as far as talking winners and losers, we kind of know the deal here. This is going to be good news for Garrett Wilson, good news for all involved on that Jets offense.
No doubt. I mean, we kind of knew it was coming. We just didn't know what the compensation was. I think it's important, and we kind of thought this was true, that the Jets are going to be able to use a 1st and a 2nd round pick to further surround Rodgers. I assume at least one of them will be an offensive lineman.
let's talk Packers really quickly here. Jordan
Okay,
Love
yeah.
next in line. We've seen very little of him since the Packers used a first rounder on him several years ago. Honestly, what we have seen hasn't necessarily been encouraging. What are your thoughts on Jordan Love and the Packers this season?
I'm concerned, to be honest
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah.
I mean, he looked good in the game he played last year, so that's encouraging. And they didn't make any other moves, so I mean, I think they like him, and at least going to see what he can do this season. But there's not much around him. I mean, I think they need at least 2 receivers. It's not a great situation to thrive in, I don't think.
Yeah, certainly going to be a tall task for Jordan Love to really become fantasy relevant or a fantasy starter, I guess I should say. I mean, obviously he's already worth a roster spot, has been on rosters in super flex leagues. And if you've been hanging on for the past 2 or 3 years, maybe you finally get a chance to see what this guy can do. And if he can help your dynasty teams, if he can help the Packers. But yeah, obviously they need to make a move. Maybe they do that with that 13 pick or the 42 pick, 42nd pick overall that they got. Maybe one of those is a wide receiver to go alongside Christian Watson and the rest of the crew there.
I would hope the target and maybe moving up those 2 spots helps to land Smith and Jigba, who we're about to talk about here.
Yeah, we are talking Smith and Jigba. It's draft week, so of course we're talking rookies. We didn't expect to be talking about Aaron Rodgers, but we had to fit some of that conversation in anticipation of the NFL draft coming up later this week on Thursday, on Friday and Saturday as well. The 4 of us, again, myself and Matt, Kate and Marcus, our co-host and compatriots on this Locked On Dynasty show, we got together and did a 3-round Dynasty rookie mock draft. One more mock before the NFL draft shakes up everything when it comes to these player values. So we're going to talk about the first round of that mock, how that shook out today. Tomorrow we'll be back talking round 2, and Kate and Marcus will take over for us on Wednesday. They'll talk round 3 and get you ready for the NFL draft on Thursday. So that's the plan. We're talking that round 1. There were a couple of surprises here, Matt, but we'll go pick by pick. We'll talk about every single player we chose. We'll, of course, focus on the picks that we made and be able to add a little insight there. And we'll do all that right after this break.
So I went to therapy a while back, and it's been a long time. I got away from it, and frankly, I haven't given it much thought. And then BetterHelp became, a sponsor of ours, and I think I'm going to give it a try again. So it's something I want to look into. Hey, I go to a doctor, I go to a dentist. What's the difference between, why not, embrace your mental health and go to a professional that knows more about it than you do? So, therapy is all about deepening your self-awareness and understanding, because sometimes we don't even know what we want or why we react the way we do until we talk through things, especially with a professional. So BetterHelp connects you to a licensed therapist. You can take on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. So like me, if you're thinking about starting therapy, I think BetterHelp is the way to give it a shot here. It's entirely online. It's very, very, it's designed to be super convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. That's really appealing to me. So just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. And again, visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. So that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
All right, Matt, let's jump into this Dynasty rookie mock. We did use a Superflex format. And ladies first, we gave Kate the first overall pick. We don't have to talk about this one very long, because even in that Superflex format, of course, she took Bijan Robinson. As we talk about these picks, we'll also reference the latest DLF Dynasty rookie ADP for those Superflex rookie drafts. And Bijan is the 101 in that format, in that data set as well. So no surprise there. 102 was your pick, and you took Anthony Richardson. We've talked about all these quarterbacks over the past few weeks. You had made it clear that he was your QB1. And I think, even with some negative buzz around CJ Stroud over the past couple weeks, I still think you could make a case for any of those three, Richardson, Bryce Young, or Stroud, as your QB1 and as your potential 102 in dynasty rookie drafts. But you went with Richardson. It's got to be all about the upside here, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And we're recording this Monday afternoon of draft week, as you mentioned. And I think that this is the time of year, Peacock and I were talking about this earlier, that lying season and, some truths coming out are starting to intersect with each other. And it doesn't sound great right now, the rumors for Richardson, that he could be the one that drops, and Levis seems to be gaining heat. And there's some negativity around CJ Stroud and this test and yada, yada.
Yeah.
I don't really care. Even if Richardson falls to Tampa or Minnesota, for example, and is stuck behind someone for a year, I still think he sees the field for 10 to 12 plays a game. Not that makes him fantasy relevant, but we'll have a better feel for what he is. It's just he has the cheat code that no one else does.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And maybe it's been said, but I hadn't really thought about it that way. For so many of these players, we have kind of added the caveat, but I want to see what their draft capital is. If they get the draft capital, then I'll value them more or whatever, if they get the right landing spot. But you're kind of right. Draft capital, he doesn't have to be a top 5 pick. And
no.
I mean, that 4 spot to the Colts would certainly be nice, but he doesn't need to be a top 5 pick. He doesn't even need to be a top 10 or top 15 pick. He still has Anthony Richardson still has that upside that should be very enticing to dynasty managers. I know you talked about some negatives with Richardson. I tweeted about this last week. It was I actually heard it on the Ryan Russillo podcast. He had both Daniel Jeremiah and Todd McShay on there. They were talking prospects, of course. And the quote was from Daniel Jeremiah: "I've been talking to people every day. I don't know who the Richardson team is." And McShay responds, "I don't have one." And then McShay followed up, "I haven't heard a single team or a single person say, 'Hey, I've kind of heard this team likes Anthony Richardson.' It's going to be a wild night." It certainly is going to be a wild night. We'll see where Anthony Richardson lands. For now, he is the 1.02 in this mock draft. And just for reference, he's the 1.04 in our DLF ADP. But again, I think you're looking at a top tier of probably 6 players here. 6 players, in my opinion. A little bit of a surprise with the 1.03. Of course, the next 2 quarterbacks are on the board. The wide receiver 1 is on the board. But Marcus goes with Jahmyr Gibbs here, the running back from Alabama. He's had the positive buzz lately. Looks like he could be a first-round pick in the NFL draft, if you believe Peter Schrager. That was a report that came out this morning that Gibbs is looking like a late first-rounder. That would certainly help his draft stock, and this would look like a great pick by Marcus.
Yeah, and I love the player. He's a modern day back, and frankly, if this isn't super flex, I think he's the 2nd overall pick, although I think Smith-Njigba has a case. It worries me a little bit that he's 200 or less pounds. History isn't super kind to those guys for fantasy reasons, just the workload. But, he's going to catch passes. I'd be shocked if he's any kind of a bust.
Yeah, totally agree. And again, it's not like that's a major reach. I think you can take these the top 6 picks and almost put them in any order beyond Bijan at 1 and make a case for that. So it goes Bijan Robinson 1, Anthony Richardson 2, Jahmyr Gibbs 3. I was up with a 4 pick and I took Bryce Young. He's got an ADP of 3. I grabbed him at 4. For me, this represents a change. I spent much of the offseason with CJ Stroud as my QB1 and as my favorite pick at the 1.02, but there's been enough. It's been the positive news on Bryce Young that has swayed me more than the negative news on Stroud. But I operated for quite a while thinking or predicting that Stroud would be the 101 to Carolina. And now that it looks like a foregone conclusion that will be Bryce Young, those two have flip-flopped in my ranking. So I went Bryce Young at 4. Kate goes JSN at 5, and then Stroud rounds out that top tier at 6 overall to you. So we know you like Richardson at the top. Young versus Stroud, and how does JSN mix into that group for you, Matt?
I love JSN, but I just valued quarterbacks higher, and it seems as though you and I did more so than they did. We ended up with all the quarterbacks. I don't know if that's a coincidence or just the way that this fell, but we seem to value quarterbacks higher than they do in Superflex. Young versus Stroud is interesting to me in that as a young drafter that he's going to be a Carolina Panther, where I could make the argument, or at least just throwing out this conversation, I'm not even sure I'm standing by it, that Stroud could land at a better place than the Carolina Panthers. Because I think I'm pretty certain the Panthers are going to have a rough year on offense. Now, probably where Stroud lands will be a rough year too. Most quarterbacks have rough years as rookies. But if it's Indy, is that better? You know what I mean? Like, you know what door number 1 is. Are you happy with door number 1 for a landing spot, or do you want to try door number 2?
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And there are several leagues out there that are drafting before the NFL draft. I've seen quite a few of those tracked and mentioned on Twitter and on some of our other social media. So yeah, if you are drafting right now, you've got to make that tough decision. The known, at least we think it's the known, with Bryce Young versus the unknown landing spot for Stroud and honestly for Richardson as well.
Right.
So that is our top 6: Bijan Robinson, Anthony Richardson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bryce Young, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, and CJ Stroud at 6. We're going to finish off the first round.
Quick question. I apologize.
Sure.
So do you think 9 out of 10 Superflex rookie drafts, they would be the top 6 picks in some order?
Yeah. I mean, as of now,
right.
Maybe
you don't want the 7th pick.
I don't mind the 7th pick, but I certainly think there's a tier gap there.
A gap.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Right. Yeah. I agree.
We'll talk about that 7th pick and the rest of the picks in the first round right after this break. Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Everydayers, make sure you come back tomorrow because we're talking about the second round of this final pre-NFL draft rookie mock draft. Come back, check that out, find out who you should be targeting in round 2. Matt, 1.07. Marcus had that pick. You've already called it a tough pick. Marcus seemed to know who he wanted. He took Zach Charbonnet, and this was an interesting one. Charbonnet has an ADP of 11 overall. Charbonnet's the RB3 off the board in this mock, and I think he'll be the RB3 in most Dynasty rookie drafts. But maybe you could get him a little later. Were you surprised Charbonnet over the next group of wide receivers and over Will Levis as well?
No, that's a pick I would have made at the time too.
Okay.
I mean,
so
there is a
lot.
Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of buzz about Levis now going to the Colts or being the 3rd or maybe even the 2nd quarterback off the board. And that's swell. I just don't think he's a good prospect. I really don't. I mean, he's not for me. So I think Charbonnet is much safer, although Levis carries a lot of weight because he's a quarterback, of course.
Right. Lots of good landing spots for Charbonnet and really all of the running backs that are kind of in that tier. We've now seen the Rodgers move. I'm waiting on some other veteran moves, potentially that could open the door for even more running back playing time. The Cincinnati rumors that they could part ways with Joe Mixon still out there. Same thing in Minnesota with Dalvin Cook. So we'll see where Zach Charbonnet lands. But anywhere in this back half of the first round, I think is where you could see him as high as 7, or maybe with a perceived negative landing spot, maybe he drops to that late first round range. No surprise here. I had the 1.08 pick, and I did take Will Levis, my Kentucky guy.
Sure.
Part of that is being a homer, I would say, but it's mostly just taking the quarterback in a super flex league, especially if he gets that top 5, top 10 draft capital, that comes with essentially guaranteed playing time, right?
Yeah,
that comes with a pretty long leash. I'm not oblivious to the concerns about Will Levis, and I agree and understand and agree with a lot of those. But I still think at 1.08, that really should be the floor. I know other people would disagree with that and might claim they wouldn't take him anywhere in the first round, or they'll just let someone else take him. Again, I get that too. But in the Superflex format, give me the guy who's a top 10 NFL draft pick at 1.08.
Real quick on that note, I mean, I think 8 should be his floor, and I would definitely take him over this group of receivers that are coming up. I mean, he would have to Zach Wilson like career. I mean, the chances of him being that, or Josh Rosen, like, I mean, catastrophically bad to not at least get some value out of this pick at 8.
Yeah, and I mean, you threw out a couple names. There's been plenty of other names. Right. Yeah, it happens. It's not impossible. And the leash is getting shorter. I mean, I think the Cardinals set that precedent back with the Rosen, Kyler Murray situation, that they essentially gave him 1 year and were ready to move on. Zach Wilson got a little more than that, but not really, due to some missed time and some of the veterans starting there. I really don't blame teams, honestly. If you know pretty early, then go ahead and move on when you can. So a top 10 draft capital does come with a leash. It does come with guaranteed playing time, but you've got to prove that you belong when you do get on the field. All right, 1.09. Jordan Addison is the pick here. That was Kate, and Addison is the wide receiver 2 in this class, and at least in this mock draft, behind JSN. What do you think's the gap here from Smith and Jigba to Addison, or is Addison even your wide receiver 2?
No, he's my 4. Okay. But I think there's a large gap between Smith and the Jigba and the 2. And frankly, Flowers and Johnston, I've moved back and forth 100 times. So they're basically tied for 2. I had to make that decision. I went for Flowers. Either was just fine with me. Addison's a clear 4, but I think there's a substantial gap after JSN.
So Addison was the pick at 9. The ADP does agree with Kate here, because Addison's ADP is 7 overall. So he's still coming in ahead of Zay Flowers, ahead of Quentin Johnston, and actually ahead of the previous 2 picks, Charbonnet and Levis. So Kate, based on the ADP, Kate got a nice value. You're not quite as sold. What is it that has you concerned about Jordan Addison in this range?
I understand Zay Flowers and Josh Downs are smaller receivers, but they don't play as small as Addison, and they're not nearly as slight. They're stronger. They're better built. Addison got schemed up a lot in both of those schools, especially Pitt. And I'm not saying he can't get open on his own. I think he's going to get pushed around, and I just don't see a lot of touchdowns in his future.
Okay. All right, Addison, 1.09. The names we've already mentioned are coming next. Matt took Zay Flowers at 10. Marcus took Quentin Johnston at 11. The ADP actually has those guys flipped. Johnston, 9 overall. Zay Flowers, 10 overall. I think especially those 3 receivers, and maybe we could throw Josh Downs into the mix as well. He's our 12 pick to round out the first round. You're going to see very different orders for Addison, Flowers, Johnston. For me, Addison is still the wide receiver 2, Flowers is 3, and Johnston is 4. So I agree with this order of how we drafted them. Matt,
Downs must be 5 for you, though, too.
Downs is 5 for me. Yes.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. What do you think about Downs? He was my pick to end the first round.
Yeah, I like the pick, and I probably would have taken him there as well. He's smaller, but I think I don't say he's going to be Welker catching 100 balls every year or Edelman, but I think he has more of that to his game, where a lot of slot, easy receptions. I think he could be a 8 to 10 target guy per game for him once he gets settled in. So that has a lot of value.
I was talking with a friend yesterday, I believe, and we were talking about this late range of the first round. in these super flex drafts and talking about Downs, and we both like the player. Obviously, I took him here in the first round, but we also just kind of came to the conclusion that based on a typical year or a typical rookie draft, Josh Downs doesn't seem like a player you might be taking in the late first round, right? Feels,
No.
Maybe he's more of a mid-second round. And part of that is due to some disappointment at the running back position. We thought this running back class would be so strong with guys like Tank Bigsby and Sean Tucker and Zach Evans. None of those show up in the first round here. We ended up with 3 first-round running backs in Robinson, Gibbs, and Charbonnet. And we'll talk about some of those backs tomorrow as we cover the second round. But yeah, once you get down to 11 or 12, maybe you start fishing for 24 picks. And I mean, I know some people will kind of roll their eyes at that. We're always, next year's class is always better than this year's. And I get those comments. We certainly did it last year as we were drooling over this 23 class. And now here we are thinking, maybe it's not that great.
I mean, I was about to say that you stole a little of my thunder there. I would certainly rather have a next year's generic first than Josh Downs.
Yeah, I mean, the second you get Josh Downs on your team, and I like Downs.
Yeah.
If somebody offered you a first rounder for him, you would take it. I would say the same thing with Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers. I would be tempted. Zach Charbonnet, I would be tempted. I mean, even think about right now.
I do it for Addison too.
Think about the running back position in general. How many of those guys are you trading a future first rounder for? I mean, we've got the obvious names at the top, but I would say it's single digits, the number of players, the number of running backs you would trade a future first rounder for. And so is Zach Charbonnet going to put himself in that group? I don't think so.
That's about as borderline as it gets, but probably not.
Yeah.
So
here we are already looking ahead to next year. I don't like doing that. I didn't think we would have to do it this year, but things change. We hated last year's class. We being the dynasty community in general, people were giving away first rounders, and we loved this 23 class, and we got it all backwards, which is
what they call a tease in the business, Ryan. I mean, I'm a professional here, but I think tomorrow's second round, for what you pay for them, is a little more enticing than today.
I totally agree. And I mean, if you can't get that future first for the 111, the 112, get a couple of seconds, be willing to move down, because you're going to see, I mean, we separate those rounds like it's really meaningful, but it's really not. What's meaningful are the tiers. So if the last 3 guys in the first round and the first 3 guys in the second round are in the same tier, move down. If you can find somebody that values that first rounder because it's a first rounder, take a couple second rounders and fire those bullets that way. We will talk about round 2 on tomorrow's show, so check back with us for that. We'll talk about guys like Tank Bigsby and Zach Evans and many more. But that's it for today's show. Please make sure you download and subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to follow the show at Locked On Dynasty. You can follow Matt at Williamson NFL, and I'm Ryan MC23. We'll be back next time with more Locked On Dynasty.